Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are stepping right into the ring. And I don't mean a boxing ring. But honestly, the tension in this source material is, well, you could cut it with a knife.
Oh, sure.
We're looking at this huge verbal sparring match. It's a Jubilee video. Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists surrounded.
And it's actually 25 atheists, so even more surrounded.
Right, but here's the hook. This isn't just, does God exist? That's kind of the boring version. This is a battle over the dictionary itself.
A fight over definitions.
Exactly. A fight over the definition of reality. Is God, a bearded man in the sky, or is God the voice of your conscience?
Is morality just a biological quirk for survival, or is it divine?
And this is the kicker. Does every single person on this planet worship something, whether they admit it or not?
It really is a fascinating collision of worldviews. You have Jordan Peterson, the clinical psychologist, who's so deep in Jungian archetypes and, utility. And he's facing off against all these atheists who are coming from a place of materialism, logic, and empiricism.
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is dissect the rhetorical strategies. We aren't here to pick a winner.
No. We're looking at how Peterson tries to redefine these religious concepts to sort of corner his opponents.
And how the atheists, in turn, try to pin him down on just literal facts.
Yeah.
It's like watching two people play chess, but one is using the rules of poetry.
And the other is using the rules of geometry. They're on completely different boards.
So let's jump in. Segment 1, the definition game. Peterson opens with this really provocative claim. He basically says atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Right. It's a bold opening gambit. He's pretty much saying the thing you don't believe in, that's not even what I'm talking about.
Exactly. And immediately he gets pushback. There's this one challenger, a former traditional Catholic priest.
Which is a big deal.
A huge deal. This isn't some casual non-believer. He says he studied the magisterium, did the rosary daily, biblical hermeneutics.
Just to pause on hermeneutics. He's signaling that he knows the architecture of the religion from the inside out. He gets the interpretation game.
Yeah, he's basically saying, look, Dr. Peterson, I know exactly what I rejected. I didn't leave because I didn't get it. I left because I got it.
Which is such a powerful counter. Logically, he seems to have the upper hand there.
You'd think so, but watch how Peterson pivots. He doesn't engage with the guy's specific reasons for leaving. Instead, he just attacks his aim. He says, your aim was off then, so there's a possibility it's still off now.
Oof. It's a sharp rhetorical elbow, isn't it? It feels like it's getting very close to that no true Scotsman fallacy.
How so?
Well, that's the logical error where you dismiss a counterexample by just saying it wasn't a true member of the group. Well, if you were a real Christian, you wouldn't have left.
It does feel a little dismissive, like he's saying, I know your internal state better than you do.
It can come off that way. But if we try to steelman Peterson's argument, he's driving at a deeper point. He thinks atheists have a reductive view of God. He calls it the sky daddy version.
The simple old man in the sky.
Exactly. And Peterson's saying if that's what you're rejecting, then fine, reject it. But that's not God. That's a caricature.
He uses that story from the Bible to illustrate this, the one about Moses.
Yes, this is his key example. He brings up Exodus, where Moses asks to see God. And God basically says, you can't see my face and live.
So what does he do?
God puts Moses in the cleft of a rock, passes by, and Moses only gets to see God's back.
Okay, so what's the takeaway from that?
For Peterson, it means the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's infinite. And for a finite creature like us, seeing it head on would, blow our circuits.
So if an atheist is just rejecting a man on a cloud, they're not even engaging with the real concept.
That's his point. They're rejecting a toy version.
Okay, so Peterson moves the goalposts. But the atheists, they don't let him get away with it. This brings us into what I'm calling the semantic fog.
Oh, yes. The Lono trap.
The Lono trap. This atheist named David asks Peterson, tell me everything you know about the Polynesian deity Lono. And of course, Peterson says,
I don't know anything about Lono.
And David just goes, uh-huh. So you're rejecting Lono without understanding what you're rejecting. It's the perfect mirror of Peterson's own argument.
It is. It's logically sound. David's saying, look, we don't have to be experts on every god to not believe in them. But Peterson, he just refuses to bite. He won't say if he believes in Lono or not.
He just sidesteps the whole thing. Then we have Greg, whose point I really liked. He brings up the Mona Lisa.
The polysemy argument.
Right. He says, if I say the Mona Lisa is moving, I mean emotionally. If I say it's moving across the room, I mean physically.
He's trying to clear the fog. He's saying, Dr. Peterson, we get your metaphorical definitions, but when we say we don't believe in God, we're rejecting the literal physical mover.
He's trying to force him to admit there's a difference between a metaphor and an actual being. And what does Peterson do?
He pivots. Again. He defines God as the voice of conscience.
Right. Do you have a conscience? Yes. Then you experience God.
And that's where the friction really sparks. An atheist accuses him of retreating into a semantic fog. Because if God is just, well, empathy and reason that evolved over time, why call it God?
Exactly. Just call it conscience. If I call my car a motorized freedom machine, it doesn't make it magical. It's still a car.
Well, Peterson would say that's too mechanical. He'd argue these ancient stories are the best descriptors we have for that internal voice. But to the atheists, it just feels like he's renaming psychology as theology to win.
Speaking of which, let's get to the source of morality. This was a huge part of the debate. Peterson claims morality and purpose cannot be found in science.
A classic philosophical stance. You can't get an ought from an is.
But the atheists came with receipts. There's this guy, Brian, Mr. Canada, and he argues it's all evolutionary.
And his examples were really good.
I love them. He talks about the Neanderthal skeleton of an old man, no teeth, one arm, who lived into his 40s.
Meaning the tribe had to have taken care of him, fed him, protected him.
That's altruism. Way before the Bible. And then there's the chimpanzee example. If one chimp gets fewer grapes than his buddy, he absolutely freaks out.
A biological sense of fairness. Their argument is that morality is a survival mechanism for social animals. It's not from on high, it's from the ground up.
Then it gets even stickier with slavery. This guy Luke, a former young earth creationist, points out the Bible regulates slavery, it doesn't ban it.
Yeah.
So, if God is the source of morality, why was he okay with owning people?
Peterson's defense here is, well, it's fascinating. He doesn't deny the slavery in the Bible. He says the Western Judeo-Christian tradition was the only movement in history to eventually abolish it.
And he credits that to the idea that man is made in God's image.
Right. But Luke pushes back hard on that. He says, wait a minute. Humans drove abolition, but humans also drove the institution of slavery.
It's a cultural evolution. We got better. We edited our own rule book.
And there's the clash. Peterson sees the spirit of the text leading to freedom over millennia. The atheists are looking at the literal text Leviticus, Exodus, and seeing rules for owning people.
Looking at the same book and seeing two totally different things. Now, speaking of seeing things differently, we have to talk about truth. This was maybe the most tense part of the whole video.
The Nazi in the attic.
But first, his definition of belief. He says belief isn't what you say, it's what you act out, what you stake your life on.
Which is a very pragmatic definition.
So, to test this, Brian brings up the classic ethical dilemma. You're hiding Jews in your attic in Nazi Germany. The Nazis knock. Are there any Jews here? Do you tell the truth?
Logically, of course, you lie. You lie to save a life. The atheist's point is that truth, in that moment, is not the highest value.
But Peterson refuses to answer the hypothetical. He calls it a game. He says, I would live my life so as not to end up in that corner.
Which is a very strange response. He's refusing to engage with the hypothetical because he believes if you live a perfectly truthful life, you somehow avoid those situations.
It felt like a total dodge. It was like he couldn't just admit that sometimes lying is the moral thing to do.
It showed that his definition of truth is just slippery. For the atheists, truth is about facts. For Peterson, truth is about what leads to good outcomes. So they're talking about two different concepts.
That's semantic fog again. Okay, so let's talk worship. Because Peterson claims everybody worships something, even atheists.
This goes back to his whole hierarchy of values. Whatever you prioritize most, whatever you give your attention to, that's your God. It could be money, it could be status, whatever.
And this guy Gerard is having none of it. He says, look, I love my wife, I prioritize her, but I do not worship her.
But Peterson argues that high-level prioritization is worship, functionally. He's saying if you strip away the religious language, the psychological act is identical.
And then he drops the hammer. He says if you don't have a unifying top value, a God, then you're fragmented. You're a nihilist. And you can't be happy.
The nihilism trap. Gerard asks, are there happy nihilists? And Peterson pretty much says no. He claims that without that structure, you just spiral into anxiety.
It really feels like he's diagnosing them, doesn't it? Like he's the clinician in the room. You think you're happy, but let me tell you, you're actually fragmented.
Exactly. He's analyzing their subconscious while they're trying to analyze his conscious arguments.
Which brings us to the final challenge, the final boss battle. Xena. Peterson himself said she asked the best questions.
Zena was brilliant. She cut right through all the fog. She went straight for the core conflict. Fact versus metaphor.
She asked him about the utility of his whole metaphorical interpretation. She basically says, okay, if the Bible is just meta-truths, these timeless stories, but not historically true, then how does that save a soul?
It's the ultimate question for his framework. She's really asking, did Jesus literally rise from the dead? Because for a traditional Christian, that's not a metaphor. That's the difference between heaven and hell.
And if Peterson says it's just a metaphor for rebirth, well, to a literalist, that's heresy. To an atheist, it's just fiction.
And this is where Peterson cracks. Just a little. It's a real moment of vulnerability.
He admits it. He says Zena pushed him beyond the limits of his knowledge.
A very rare admission from him. He says he doesn't fully understand the relationship between fact and destiny. He doesn't know how the literal history connects to the spiritual outcome.
So what does he fall back on?
His pragmatic defense. He judges the Bible by its fruits. He looks at the success of Western civilization and says, whatever this book is, it works.
So he defends the utility of the structure, even if he can't defend the literal truth of the events.
Precisely. And that right there is the perfect summary of the entire 2-hour debate.
So let's wrap this up. The verdict. 25 atheists versus 1 psychologist. Who won?
Well, it depends on the scorecard, doesn't it? If you're scoring on logical consistency, on definitions, I think the atheists won. They pinned him down on the truth dilemma. They exposed the ambiguity of his definitions. But if you're scoring on psychological depth, on the utility of belief, Peterson held his ground. He successfully argued that humans need a hierarchy, that we need a top value, and that these religious structures have provided a powerful survival mechanism.
It's a clash of languages. The atheists are speaking C++, logic, facts, true, false. Peterson is speaking in poetry.
And that's why they talk past each other. The atheists want to know if the burning bush was chemically possible. Peterson wants to know what the fire means for the human soul.
It's a fascinating watch. It really forces you to check your own definitions. When you say you believe something, do you mean it's factually accurate? Or do you just mean you act it out? So here's where we'll leave you today. Peterson argues that whatever you prioritize most, whatever sits at the very top of your attention hierarchy, that is your God. So ignore what you say you believe. Forget the label, Christian, atheist, whatever. If we stripped all of that away and just looked at where you spend your time, your money, and your attention, who or what is your God, really? Thanks for thinking deeper with us. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.